Hey, how are you, everyone? I had someone contact me through the C100 group looking to see how my workflow was, how I color graded, how I color correct, and I just wanted to give you a quick tutorial on what I do. So basically, the first thing I do is I bring in all the clips that I want to use. I do a rough cut with no color correction. After that, after I kind of have an idea of the look that I'm going for and I have the pacing down with the music and everything, I'll do the color correction. The first thing that I do is I'll bring in RGB curves. So down here on the effects panel, I'm in the color space. This is Premiere CC. So I click on color, I go down to the effects panel, I click RGB. From there I grab RGB curves and I'll apply that to the clip that I want to work on. From there, I will look down on the histogram panel here, and the goal of the histogram is to get the most basically color range, but most contrast, I should say. And the way to do this is to get the bottom of all of your information closest to 0 as possible, and all the rest of the information up to 100. And I'll show you what I mean. This basically brings color back to your image and brings contrast. So I will grab, if you look over here on the master curves adjustment, I will take the bottom part and drag it right until it's close to 0 on the histogram. So if you look over here, it moved slightly down to 0. Your image does get dark from doing that, but you will bring it back to the proper exposure after you do this next step. So you take the top part of the master curve and you're going to drag it left. And if you look over on the histogram, you can see as it's moving upward. Right there, I would stop. And again, you have nice contrast between this, but your image still might look a little dark. You can see on the subject's face, she's still kind of dark compared to the other girl's hand. So what I do is I'll take around the mid-range of the masters on the curve and I'll bring it up and to the left. And basically I will bring it far enough to where you can see like this one line on the histogram. I'll bring that close to like 50, anywhere from 40 to 60. That just brings in some of the light. And you get a proper exposure basically from doing that. The only other thing that I do, if need be, is I'll go and look at the RGB, and if something, let's say the red levels are a little low, your image, the tint of it is a little too green. It's the same concept as the master curve. You can see here that the red level is not quite at 100, which is the reason why it looks greenish and blue. So let's say that the part of the curve was actually all the way up to the top, but the level was still too low. You would drag that out until it brought the red up. In this case, you didn't have to. I shot the color balance pretty evenly because I was using a window light from the left side, which is the key light for her. I had another daylight balance light, just camera left, bouncing off a whiteboard, which filled in the shadow here, and I had a hair light, and it was all set to daylight, so the white balance was very easy to figure out, and I didn't really have any issues of having one color dominant over the other. After that, what I do is I will bring in something called Lumetri curves. Again, you don't need to type it in. It's set up on the right side for you to begin with. So let me enable that. For this color correct, I use Cinespace. Oh, I'm jumping the gun here. Hold on, sorry. So the way Lumetri color is set up, it's kind of like Photoshop for Premiere. You start with your basic correction. That's if you had a certain LUT that you knew you wanted to use. You can go in and apply any LUT that you want, and it gives you a color correction. Let's say that you're shooting with an external monitor on your C100 Mark II, and you like the way that LUT looked while you were shooting your footage. I'm pretty sure, I haven't done this because I've never needed to. You can install that same LUT and it'll give you a color grade. As for this, let's say that you did shoot mixed lighting. It was leaning either too warm or too cold. You can go in and change your temperature also with the tint. If it's too magenta or too green, you can go and change that. You have all the exposure, contrast, basically everything that you would need to adjust the image. I usually don't use this. I will use more of the curves. I prefer it better. That's how I learned. I feel like I can bring in the contrast and everything a little bit better than through the basic correction. Where I mainly work in is the creative part. On this, I used Cinespace. So if you look at the image, you can see it's very subtle. It brings a little bit of shadows to the left side of her face, or camera left, I should say, and it gives it a little bit more contrast. It's very minute, but you can see, clicking on and off, it gives her a little bit warmer tone to her face too. When you're shooting C-Log, it'll record and there's barely any sharpness to the image. That's obviously, there's not a lot of color, there's not a lot of sharpness. That's to get the most data recorded onto the card. I bring sharpness back. I'll do anywhere from 25 to 50. If you do too sharp, it looks a little ridiculous. But for this, I'll go around 50. Vibrance as well, I bring up to about 50. That just brings in a little more color. From there, that's basically it. I mean, there's other sections you can use, like the curves adjustment. You can do your own curves. Again, I don't think it's necessary because you have the RGB curves. And if you wanted to bring in a little more brightness or you wanted to take some away, you can do it in the curves, the RGB curves. Other than that, you have the color wheel section. Basically, you can bring the shadows up or you can bring them down if you wanted to, if you wanted to add a little more contrast to it. You can also color grade the shadows. Obviously, that's a little extreme. That's if you're really looking to do fine-tuned color correction. I don't really mess with this all that much too because I haven't had a necessity to. This is basically secondary color correction that I can make another tutorial for if anyone's interested. And vignetting. Obviously, everyone knows what vignetting is. You can go to the left or the right, depending on which look you want. Alright, well, if there's anything else I can explain to anyone, if anyone has any other questions, please just feel free to personal message me or make a post in the group, and I'll be more than happy to share the information that I have.